Welcome back. Now, the 2025 edition of the Absa Africa Financial Markets Index shows 10 out of 29 countries increased their overall scores. This is, though, a slowdown from 2024 when 23 countries increased their overall scores. Market depth, access to foreign exchange and market transparency are among the top pillars used to score the country's financial market progress and performance. Absa Chief Economist Jeff Gable joins us now to unpack the print in greater detail. Jeff, hi, good to chat to you on the close this evening. Take us through, is this a bit of a slide or is it just more countries being taken a look at?
So, what we'd like to see is each and every year, all countries move forward in the scoring. As you mentioned, this year, the results are a little bit mixed. It's 10 up, 11 down, 8 unchanged. So it's clear that there's a bit more nuance this time. But when we look in the detail, we think about the roughly 40 things that we measure inside the index. Some of them are active. Policymakers, regulators making active decisions to improve the openness and transparency and accessibility of Africa's financial markets. And so we see new products being introduced. We see sort of markets being made more transparent. Other bits are kind of more passive. So things like market liquidity in the most recent year for a number of countries had fallen, and certainly that impacted a bunch of the scores.
What exactly do you look at, though? I mean, you spoke about transparency, and I think you've got 6 pillars, if I'm correct. Take us through that.
You know, it's quite interesting. So we put together the concept of this index about a decade ago. It's been running for 9 years. We thought long and hard as how do you measure how open a financial market system is, how transparent it is, how accessible. And so we organized ourselves around those 6 pillars. So one thinks about sort of product diversity, what financial products exist. One thinks about the FX market, and not just sort of the ability to get FX, but how clear is the information around how deep are reserves. A third broad topic we looked at is around market transparency in the regulatory environment. So that thinks about things like tax agreements between countries. It thinks about things like having credit ratings, not just for sovereigns, but for corporates. It thinks about the enabling legislation for ESG product in a space like that. Fourth pillar looks around long-term local capital. And we proxy that by thinking about sort of the existence and the depth of pension funds in local markets. The fifth broad thing we look at is just the macro environment. Countries that grow more quickly, have lower inflation, tend to be easier to put money to work in. But we also think about transparency there. How clear is communication from the central bank around monetary policy decisions? How clear are discussions around public finance? Both things really highly topical in South Africa right now. And then the very last pillar is a bit of a technical one, but it's thinking about adopting sort of global standards, legal standards around the netting and collateralization of positions. All of these things are really important in getting Africa's financial systems ready to not only be able to best attract money from overseas, but also to get that money out of the mattresses, to get that money being put to work here on the continent to grow sort of a stronger Africa.
Yeah. What's just some of the newcomers? I mean, Africa is such an exciting story. It's gone through a very difficult time, don't get me wrong, but you see these newcomers coming along. What have you seen?
Well, that's just it. So when we launched the index back in 2017, we had 17 countries in the index. Over the years, with help from the United Nations, Economic Commission for Africa and SADC and others, we've increased the number of countries in the index up to 29. It won't surprise you to know when we did that first 17, right, we were looking at those countries across the continent that, broadly speaking, already had the most developed markets. And we're looking to push even further in that space. As we've added new countries like Ethiopia and others, they've been much earlier in their in sort of their financial market development. But it's been really heartening over this period. We've seen South Africa sort of continue to set the standard. It's placed number 1 in all of the 9 years we've done the index. But the gap to second place has closed by more than half. So Mauritius has really been chopping at South Africa's heels. Uganda, just 5 years ago, within 10th place in the index, they're in 3rd place now. And so we're seeing broadly countries move along this path getting their financial market systems in a better position to put that money to work.
Gosh, that is so interesting. It really is. But I do think, Jeff, perhaps there are some no-go areas where you can't go. Some countries, the Central African Belt, there have been coups there. There's reports of Wagner being there, things like that. I suppose, are those still no-go areas?
Well, listen, I think in terms of the report, right, there are more than 50 countries in Africa. We've got 29 in the report. So we're missing, in terms of number of countries, we're missing quite a few. But if we think about the broader impact, we capture more than 80% of Africa's population. We capture more than 80% of Africa's GDP. So we've sort of got the lion's share in that space. And I think the broad point you're making, I think, is the correct one. To have a discussion about financial market openness, transparency, and accessibility, there's no point in having that discussion with the regulators or policymakers or politicians in a country where, frankly, their focus is elsewhere. They've got more fundamental stuff to be thinking about today. So we really look to include those countries for which these kinds of developments, right? We've had Ethiopia, for example. It's taken them a number of years. They've moved sort of a long path towards opening up a securities exchange. Absolutely critical in terms of being able to attract capital, put it to work in the country. It's taken them a while, but they more or less got there. That's very exciting.
It actually is really exciting. It really is. And the glass is definitely half full and not empty here. Jeff, thank you so much. Good to have you on the close this evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you. That was Jeff Gable, Chief Economist at Absa.